Now, a quick diversion, and that gets us into a special package. I beg your pardon. And we're looking at the African Growth and Opportunities Act, particularly how East Africa's largest economy has taken advantage of that. Now, the number of jobs created by the two-decade-old AGOA agreement between Kenya and America has hit about 66,260 jobs ahead of the trade pact's expiration date. Now, AGOA, which is a legislative trade pact enacted by the U.S. Congress in May of 2000, allowed accredited sub-Saharan countries to ship their exports to the U.S. without tariffs. Now, Perpetual Fashame Peter will take us deeper into this, and I'll be back.
The apparel industry has seen the most job growth under African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, in Kenya. In 2018, export processing zones (EPZ) companies exported goods worth 72 billion Kenyan shillings, a good chunk of which was textiles. The value of textile exports under AGOA increased significantly by 25.8% from 33.1 billion Kenyan shillings in 2017 to 41.6 billion Kenyan shillings in 2018. In 2022, the value of apparel exported from Kenya under the pact hit a new high of 54.1 billion Kenyan shillings from 48.8 billion Kenyan shillings in 2021.
I think that's one industry that has done very well, but I would wish that AGOA was covering more industries. And the one that I'm most interested in would be agriculture. I'll be very glad if Kenyans can export more fruits, more coffee, more tea, and other products to the US market, and not in raw form, but in processed form. So I think what AGOA has done for textiles should be extended to other products, other industries, so that we expand them and we create more jobs.
Owing to the success recorded so far, Kenyan manufacturers, through their lobby association, had in March appealed to the country's trade ministry to forward a request to the Joe Biden-led administration seeking an extension of the deal for another 15 years, arguing that uncertainty in its fate was costing the country billions of shillings in potential investments.
If I remember the agreement, it was supposed to end in year 2025. But I'm sure between now and 2025, the new government is likely to negotiate for extension. And I think investors like certainty. They don't like doing things that are open-ended. But you can be sure very soon there will be a new negotiation. And my hunch tells me that AGOA will be extended and hopefully include more products.
While the feat achieved in the number of new jobs created through AGOA is commendable, it is imperative to mention that due to a lack of development of higher value-added products, AGOA had less effectiveness in alleviating poverty for workers in other sectors, such as cotton cultivation, cocoa production, and chemicals.
I think from my experience that when it comes to trade negotiations, we are not very good in that. We don't negotiate very hard. So we need to learn how to negotiate, whether it is for Brexit, whether it is for European Union, whether it's for African Caribbean. We need to learn how to negotiate so that we get very good deals in trade. If you remember, economic partnership agreement took a very long time to be concluded. The World Trade Organization or the Uruguay round took also a very long time before they were negotiated and concluded. So in Africa, we need to learn to be better negotiators when it comes to trade so that we get a good deal. AGOA brings a much wider issue about the role of trade in African growth. So Africa has always been getting a lot of help from other countries, from China, from US, from European Union, and so on. But I think the best way to develop Africa is to focus more on trade. So we should build on AGOA so that we build a wide and very vibrant export market. We make trade the avenue for African growth. So I expect more exports from Kenya, from East Africa, from West Africa to the rest of the world. That is how countries like China, how countries like Japan, how countries like Korea grew, by having something to export to the rest of the world. One more thing is I want us to move away not just from textiles, but more advanced technology that are more value-added and makes more money for Africa, for Kenya. And that's how we are going to create jobs and make Africa grow and play its role in the global scheme of things.
Fingers are crossed to see if the pact will be extended, and what's more, it remains to be seen if players in the other sectors will take advantage of it to turn in more numbers and, by extension, more jobs. Perpetua Fashame Peter reporting for News Central.
And Kenya is not the only sub-Saharan African country to benefit from the AGOA Act, but Kenya really has been at the front line of course, asking for the AGOA Act to be extended. Now, the decision will be taken sometime later this year. Expectation is hopefully that President Joe Biden will, of course, extend it. Now, we were meant to look quickly at the economic situation in Zimbabwe. Just a few highlights of that conversation that will now have to move to another date. The African Development Bank is involved in that, and that's because the economic sanctions are driving the country further into an unsustainable debt situation. Now, interestingly enough, the debt itself is not the issue, but it is the arrears. And that's the issue that Zimbabwe is having. It's giving a situation where the country's inability to access international concessional financing or other revenue or even less expensive financing to pay down its debt obligations. Now, let's look at the numbers. Of Zimbabwe's $5.7 billion of bilateral debt, arrears account for about 69%. Of the $2.6 billion of multilateral debt, arrears is 91%. So for many, this makes arrears the new debt of Zimbabwe. And there are some 5 high debt resolutions that have been held between December 2022 and May. And Zimbabwe has also institutionalized a platform for regular, constructive, and open dialogue, which is centered around arrears clearance and even debt resolution. Now, the African Development Bank is also getting deeper into this conversation because one of the biggest hurdles that Zimbabwe has to cross has to do with compensation for white farmers. So let's talk about that. The president of the African Development Bank, Akinwumi Adesina, said that the country has developed financial instruments to fast-track and front-load $3.5 billion in compensation to white farmers whose lands were taken by Zimbabwe's government. Now, the details of these financial instruments are still a bit hazy, but many people are asking, what will it look like? And will the farmers also agree, given that they've turned down an initial deal to receive a payment within 10 years via Treasury bills? There's also the conversation to be had around the sanctions, the economic sanctions that came about because of this land issue. It's been almost 2 decades, or at least 20 years, if not more, that Zimbabwe has faced these economic sanctions that have added to the crippling effects on the economy. Is it not yet time for the world, particularly Western countries, the US and the UK, to move away from sanctions that have mainly crippled the average Zimbabweans and not really made a dent with the people that apparently were supposed to be most affected? So conversations around sanctions, compensation for white farmers, as well as an IMF staff-monitored program. But at the end of it all, Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa, during a high-level debt resolution forum that held in Harare on Monday, said that Zimbabwe is realizing key milestones towards moving the country forward for the good of its people. And the 4 key reform pillars for the country's implementation program include governance reforms, land tenure reforms, compensation of former farm owners, and the resolution of bilateral investment protection agreements. But one other issue that Zimbabwe and many African countries that find themselves in debt are facing is the changing landscape of creditors. There are some creditors who have been willing to come to the table, but not all the creditors have been willing to negotiate. And this experience that Zimbabwe is going through is one that many are watching to see how other African countries will be able to negotiate and resolve their debt situations. And that's why we can take things today on Business Edge. Don't forget to follow us. We are on social media at News Central TV. And of course, there's a website, www.newscentral.africa, and there's also an app that you can download on Play Store and App Store. 12 p.m. West African time, you have News Central Now coming your way with all the latest in news and information from here on the continent. Do have a pleasant day.